Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royse. I'm a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. The 2015 Nepal earthquake destroyed approximately 9,000 schools. 7 years later, Nepal is still in need of supporting to rebuild their schools. Wendy Shew is Miss Nepal Global Citizen and founded Rebuilding Education Foundation, which raised funds to help Nepal to rebuild their schools. I'm pleased to have Wendy here today to share her vision of rebuilding the education system in Nepal. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Daphne. Thank you so much for having me on the show. First off, it's really great to know you, and I'm very inspired by all that you do, your own story. I'm excited to be on your show today.
Please tell us how you involved in this educational project within Nepal.
So that is a very good question, and it's a little bit of a longer one. So in my own adolescence, I experienced a very early tragedy, and that caused me to learn the value of education very early on. Education is what I believe changed my life. And so I traveled to Nepal back in 2014 after a trip I made to India. And I was visiting. And afterwards, the earthquake happened in 2015 and 9,000 schools were damaged. So when I came back, I volunteered for 3 months on the ground in earthquake disaster relief. And after learning that, I really wanted to be able to provide kids in Nepal with the opportunity to education. I knew what education had done for me. So I started to work in the relief efforts of rebuilding schools and homes in Nepal.
I understand you were born and raised in the United States. How do you get involved in a country that you know nothing about?
That is a good question. Every single day I am still learning. I think life is a never ending journey of learning about your own country and others. In my opinion, I really see myself as a global citizen and not someone who is just a citizen of their own country. I think the world is our planet to learn about. So when it comes to the question of how do I get to know about a country that I wasn't born in, well, I spend a lot of time in Nepal to learn about the culture. And it's really just having the experience, spending day to day with people, being with them, and learning about generational poverty. Back in 2016 to 2019, the first 3 years of the founding of my organization, I spent 3 years in the ground. So I actually lived with the people. I actually did surveys and learned about generational poverty. I spent time going to their festivals and learning about their culture. And it really is about just immersing yourself into a country, living there and experiencing what day-to-day life is about. Many people come to a country and they come and they visit for maybe 2 weeks to a month. And we really just learn the surface level that way about, eating their foods or seeing their tourist sites and their museums. But I believe that when you actually spend time on the ground, live with the people, live the way that they live in the conditions that they live in, and really immerse yourself in the culture of being with them on a day-to-day basis, that's how you really get to learn about a country and how to work in that country.
Were you in Nepal during the 2015 earthquake?
I actually wasn't. I was there in 2014, October 2014. I went for my first trip. The earthquake happened in April of 2015. And then after that, I came in July 2015 to help with the earthquake relief efforts.
So how many schools were in Nepal before 2015 earthquake, and how many schools survived?
So that's also a really good question. And I know I was talking to you briefly about this earlier, Daphne. And to me, I started to do research in Nepal, right? Because I wanted to learn about a lot of the challenges. And Nepal in general is a very fascinating country to me. It's full of like this amazing culture of different religions. So in Nepal, you have Tibetans that have immigrated there. You have Indians. You have people from Malaysia and Myanmar. It's kind of this melting pot of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhism. Um, so seeing that Nepal actually used to be more of a monarchy back in 1951, the people didn't really focus on education then. It was more religion driven, very Hinduism country back in 1951. So education then was only available to wealthy people, to the highest of elites. And it wasn't until 1971 that they then opened up education to the general public. Then there were approximately about 300,000 schools that were built. Females didn't even start attending education or going to school until somewhere about 1990s up into the 2015s or so. So out of those 300,000 schools that were then in Nepal, the earthquake damaged 9,000 of them.
Is Nepal has a mandatory that all kids need to go to school at certain grades?
Now it is a little bit more mandatory, but honestly, it's very hard for the people to, or the government to be able to ensure that all the kids do that, because a majority of Nepal is central to like Pokhara, Chitwan, and Kathmandu. These are the big cities, and this is where the government can mandate. When you go out into the far regions of far out west or far out east, like west is going to be very rural, east is going to be very rural, and it's hard because there's a lack of infrastructure for governments to actually head out there. So it's not necessarily mandated. And when you go out into these super rural villages that I have been, that I have seen, you see huge communities, several hundred thousands of people, and they're suffering from food insecurity, from severe extreme poverty, of not having water day to day, not having food day to day. And what I see is that one of the biggest reasons is they lack the resources and the education to learn about how they can create more resources for themselves, right? So while it is mandated and it is overall countrywide necessary and mandated that kids go to school, I think it's very hard for the government to ensure that the kids far out west in rural villages or far out east are actually following those mandates.
What grade are your program helping to rebuild?
We focus on all grades. So here in the United States, we have elementary school and we have middle school and we have high school and then universities, right? And that's very similar in a lot of developed countries. I think what people don't realize, and what I didn't realize even going into Nepal and working, is that because it's a developing country, they don't have as much systems and structures in place. When I first traveled out into the rural villages, what I found shocking was that I would go visit one school and I would say, hey, how many people are living in this village? And usually it's approximately 100 to 500 households. And I would say, okay, how many school grades do you have? And they would say class 0 to class 4. And I was like, that's interesting. I thought that was their elementary school. Then I would go to the next school and I would say, okay, how many class grades do you have? And they would say 0 to 7. And what I learned was that a lot of the times in these rural villages, they build schools according to what the current need is. So one of the challenges is that they don't really think long term. They're learning how to think long term. And that is what the challenge of not having education has created for them. Instead of knowing to create something systematic that will then be able to support them with education long term, they create or build a school of what the current need is. At that time, that current need might be like, okay, Well, our oldest children are age 12, and they might just build up to class 0 to class 7. Now what we're seeing is a more systematic approach as a lot of organizations are coming in. When we go to schools, when building education goes into rural villages and focus on rebuilding the schools that have been damaged by the earthquake, we look long term. We don't just think, okay, these kids are from the age of, 5 years old to 9 years old. Let's just build an elementary school. We think, okay, most of the kids are relatively young. They're younger than 9. The next school that can provide them with education up to 12th grade, up to 17 years old, is about a 2-hour walk away. Why don't we focus on building a school that can cover elementary, middle, and up to high school? And that is what is known as a secondary school in Nepal. So building education focuses on the need. We also think long-term. We also look into how far is the next school with secondary education involved. As of right now, we've built schools up to 7th grade and 8th grade. Moving forward for our next school, our 4th and 5th school, we plan to build a school that will then last up to 12th grade. So all the way up to high school, secondary.
Overall, what are your challenges?
Oh, there's so many challenges when it comes to, first of all, working in a developing country. I think the biggest challenge is when we come into Nepal with American ideals. We never want to come into a country and assume that we know what is best for a country. And we never want to assume that we can go into a village and then tell the people, this is what you have to do, and this is how you have to do it. We always try to come with more inclusive solutions, right? So I think the biggest challenge is really going into community and supporting them to be able to gain a trust in our organization that we have their best interests in mind, that we want to help them, that we want to support them, and not tell them what to do. So really learning each community and working with them hand on hand to create a solution together about, what is the best type of school to build and what other resources do they need. Do they need food? Do they need water? And then how can we create those resources with them is probably the biggest challenge. However, I don't really see it as a challenge because it's fun for me. I love being able to go into a rural village and learn about their social problems and then try to, create and plug in different solutions on how we can make the system work a little bit better. Each community, each village has a different challenge. As an example, I went into one rural village and I found out that this area, while it was very small, it had about 50 households. They were addicted to Coke. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Is it cocaine or what is this? And they're like, no, they're not addicted to cocaine. They're addicted to Coca-Cola. And what it was that it's really funny, actually. They were addicted to the sugar. And the reason that became quite a big issue is because if, regular people in a rural village, the villagers, are making about $1 a day, right? Coca-Cola that comes into the villages might cost them $1.50. So they were spending all the money that they were making in one day to buy a bottle of Coca-Cola because they had an addiction to it. And then that would cause them not be able to cover expenses for their children or the need for food or clothing. And it was creating bigger extreme poverty in these tiny little rural villages. So coming into those areas, learning about it, and those things that we think might be like a silly challenge, when you see how it actually affects a community and a village so significantly. It's fun for me to go into the area and think, okay, what can we do to work with the people to let them decide that they want to make a change? How can we empower and influence them in a way that is motivating and not making them feel like disempowered, that they are doing something wrong? How can we give them a vision for a new life and hope, and not one where they can't eat every single day, where they can't feed their children, where they feel that their children will fall to their same fate? How can we give them a bigger grand vision that they can then live up to and then stay focused on that track to make a difference in their own communities? That's probably the biggest challenge amongst other ones. But that by far is the funnest challenge for building education to take on.
Just surprised to hear that their salary is less than a bottle of Coke a day. That just doesn't add up for me. Do you have other concerns like water, food, housing, other than schools in Nepal?
Yes, there are so many challenges with food insecurity and water. So the international poverty line is $1.90. And when you look at Nepal, people in Nepal usually make roughly around $1.35 to about $3.20 a day. And that's the poverty line. When you're going out far into the rural villages where they haven't learned systems of being able to open up a shop, create an economy, buy and sell things, and instead things are just still by trade and farming, they're making less than $1 a day. And the shops that they go to where they have to buy resources for their kids, such as clothing, charge them way more than that. In the rural villages, extreme poverty and is measured by multidimensional poverty. So multidimensional poverty is when you're seeing not just people have low incomes, but they suffer from several different categories of main necessities that we have in a developed country. So that includes the lack of water, right? Food insecurity, they don't have a lot of food there, a lack of healthcare, a lack of education, and no infrastructure. And when I go out into these rural villages, especially in the Himalayas, it hits all 5 of these. So when we're going out into the Himalayas, most people trek the mountains, right? If we had roads, everybody in the world would drive up to Everest and say, hey, I'm at the highest point on top of the world. So in the Himalayas, there's no roads. Most of the time, it's trekking areas. It takes kids 2 to 3 hours just to get to school. If they want to go to a secondary school, they might have to walk 4 hours. It is kind of silly to ask of people at such a young age, kids at such a young age, to walk 4 hours just to get to school every single day. Now, if they're experiencing a lack of infrastructure, you also have to think they have to only rely on what they can farm in the Himalayas. Mountainous areas usually have land that is not very arable, that is very hard to grow on. So 6 months out of the year when it's very snowy, they can't grow food. So you're seeing that the people usually only farm as a source of food. They can't farm 6 months out of the year because it's mountainous regions and it snows. It's the Himalayas, so there's no roads. So how do they get food such as dried goods, rice, crackers, anything like that, grains, from the main cities into the rural villages? It's very challenging. And there's only certain amounts of shipments that come in. And then because of that transportation, the cost of surplus goods goes up. In addition, in the rural villages, most times there aren't any educated doctors, right? If people or in the rural villages end up getting an education, they have to travel very far out into Kathmandu just to get an education and become a doctor. Most likely, they're not going to head all the way back to their rural village to then become a doctor. So what we're seeing is health posts that kids have to walk to or villagers have to walk to 2 to 3 hours away. Well, let's say someone gets severely injured. Let's say they get hit by a Jeep XYZ, or they cut themselves while they're chopping wood. They have to walk 2 to 3 hours just to get to health posts, and there's no actual doctor there. It's usually just a pharmacist. And if you're looking at a developed city, no doctor in a developed city of Nepal is going to want to then live out in the rural village to be able to care for these villagers, right? So what I believe is that it really starts with education, bringing the education into these rural villages, into these communities, creating doctors, creating teachers, creating, businessmen or entrepreneurs that can then grow this economy from where they are. It's a very great topic. Even with water, and water takes, they usually have rainwater harvesting tanks that they keep, but they only can collect water when it rains, or they have to walk down about 2 hours to get to the river. So it's very challenging. There are many challenges in these areas. What building education focuses on is building water systems, because we find that as the highest need, building schools that can then provide education for the children and create leaders locally that will then go on to become doctors, pharmacists, teachers, entrepreneurs that can start markets and shops and grow their economy. And we have seen that. Actually, we have our very first student that recently graduated from university. We fully gave her a scholarship the whole way through. Thank you so much to all our donors and sponsors that have supported her. And she actually has a plan to start a health post in her local area to help the sick people.
It sounds like there are a lot of issues in Nepal. Back to the education point, how much is needed to support a student per day?
So right now, especially in the rural villages, the government only provides students going to school with 15 rupees per day for lunch. They give it to the school. The school is then supposed to utilize that money to buy lunch for the kids so they have snacks to eat. 15 rupees actually means approximately 10 cents here in the US. So kids are being given 10 cents a day. And it's not the government's fault. It's just that there is a lack of funding, a severe lack of funding for the government to be able to give to the schools. What I believe is something even as little as $1 a day for a child, $30 a month, can move milestones to be able to provide the kids with nutritious food to eat, uniforms, and admission fees. It doesn't cover all of it, but if you were to just provide a kid with food and water, $1 a day. If you wanted to do admissions, depending on what grade it is, it varies from $30 a year, which then can go up and up depending if they're in university or not. So yeah, the main resources, I would say $1 a day for somebody in a rural village.
In general, in Nepal, are school require tuition, or this partially funded by the government?
So that's a very good question. There's three kinds of schools in Nepal. There's the government schools, there's the SMC schools, and then there's the private schools. What we build is usually the government schools and the SMC schools. The government schools do have a minor admissions fee, but it might not be as high as an SMC school. SMC means School Management Committee. And what that provides for students is a little bit more infrastructure, a better infrastructure, and then the ability to have more resources. So the government in Nepal, for the most part, they do their best to provide education at a free cost, but there are things that come with going to school that make it cost money. Uniforms cost money, materials cost money, and there are admission fees and exam fees that come throughout the year.
Was it hard to replace teachers?
Currently, building education works with building or rebuilding schools that have been damaged. So we currently have teachers already on the ground. We try not to replace them. What we do instead is seek out partner organizations that specialize in training teachers to provide quality education. So what we're seeing as we go out into the developed areas, a lot of the times, the teachers that are located there aren't as trained and educated as they can be on how to motivate the students. Again, the Nepal education system really started back in 1971. In 1971, there weren't even universities in Nepal yet. It was still just regular education from primary to secondary. So there is a huge growth in education in the upcoming years. I feel that in the past, as in anything for any country to embark on something new, we still don't know what we don't know. So now we're learning in these upcoming years of education in Nepal, we're seeing that teachers need to be better trained on how to motivate students and better trained on how do students learn? What is the best way to teach them so that they can actually grasp the information and then utilize these skills in their everyday life and jobs moving forward.
It has been 7 years since 2015 earthquake. Why has Nepal taken this long to rebuild their schools?
So during the time that the earthquake happened, 2015, there were 9,000 schools that were damaged. 22,000 homes were damaged as well, and 22,000 people were killed. A lot of support and relief money came in from other countries and really big organizations. All of that money landed into the central government in Kathmandu all at once. And then a lot of other nonprofit organizations came in. So I started off as one of those organizations, or one of those volunteers in an organization called All Hands. And what we saw, to be completely honest, was chaos. The whole entire country was in ruins. And the government was trying to figure out, okay, where do we put this money? What needs to be rebuilt first? What needs to happen first? There's actually a really great documentary that came out on Netflix that talks about the 2015 earthquake. So what I believe is a lot of that money went to saving lives in the very beginning, relief efforts. They were digging up rubble, which is a lot of what I did. Not save lives, but I was digging up a lot of rubble to clean out areas. It went out to digging out a lot of rubble and just cleaning the country first and saving lives. Digging people straight out from the earth that were still alive and trapped in the country. And then after that, it went to cleaning up the country. And then the next thing is building most of the schools that are in the city areas and building homes. And then last, there was just not enough funding to go around to everywhere else that needed it. Because of the lack of infrastructure, a lot of the times the rural villages really don't have the government representation that they need. So you're looking at a country that is 800 kilometers from the west to east. That's approximately 600 miles. It's not a huge country, it's very small. But if this country is all mountainous regions with not very much infrastructure, it takes probably just 10 days to 2 weeks to get from east to west, because people have to walk. Even for myself, when I travel up into these rural villages, I have to take a bus, I have to take a Jeep, and then I have to walk the rest of the way. So I can't get there just by transport. Well, if they're so far apart, then most of the time, people in the rural villages aren't going to make that journey all the way to the government and say, hey, we're living in this rural village in these districts, and our schools are still damaged and we still need help. So the government doesn't have awareness sometimes that these schools need support. And then there's no government representation from the community because a lot of times they don't have the education and they don't know what their rights are. And they may not even speak the Nepali language. They might have another dialect. to be able to tell the governments that they need support. And then in addition to that, the government has a very limited budget, and each municipality has a very limited budget onto what they can spend for education. So while building or rebuilding the school might be something that they want to do long term, they still need to meet the needs of the kids from day to day first, right? So if the government has to choose, okay, we have this much budget, we know that we need to rebuild the school. We know that the kids need uniforms and they don't have any clothes. We know that the kids need a teacher. We know that the kids need books. Well, if the school costs $100,000 to rebuild and that local municipality only has $20,000 to work on education, most likely that fund is going to go to then working on the teachers, on materials or whatnot before it goes to actually rebuilding the entire school.
I know you're heavily involved with Nepal. Do you have a support other educational projects in other countries?
I would love to, and that is always a dream, especially for any organization. We have a very big long-term vision that I'm very proud of. Our mission is 1,000 schools. And what I mean by that is really to build a sustainable organization that will then outlive me and carry on the mission to build 1,000 schools. So yes, we do have plans to move out to other countries. We would love to go into Haiti and the Philippines, but I think that those plans are currently still on hold because there is still a huge need in Nepal right now. And there's still so much for our organization to learn. There's a lot of things that we want to work on, especially changing the infrastructures that we have. We want to do something that is a little bit more sustainable in natural disasters, something that is more environmentally friendly and more innovative. So we're looking at these fun, innovative new tech structures that we can incorporate before we then start to go into other countries and rebuild as well. But there are so many countries that still need help. So out of an entire planet of 7 billion people, half the world actually lives in poverty. And I think for most part, us being in developed countries, we don't see that, right? Because everybody around us seems to be living well. They have enough food to eat. They have houses. Well, except for the homeless system situations recently, but we don't see what is really going on in developing countries, which is extreme poverty of living below $1.90 a day and not having resources to help them. So the more that I did research on why extreme poverty continues to occur, what I learned is that if we wanted to have one single solution to solving extreme poverty in the world, all we'd have to do is educate our females. And I couldn't believe it when I learned that. And so I'll explain a little bit about how that happens. A lot of times when we go into developing countries, there still are views that, a woman shouldn't be going to school. They shouldn't get educated. They shouldn't have to work. But the truth is, when you actually do educate your females, they then have better decision making to be able to raise their kids. They also, like looking at it from a micro scale, females will then bring in double the income for a household. That's, and if you're looking at it on a grander scale of an entire village, that's double the income for an entire village, double the economy, right? It drives the economy so much further. In addition, if girls go to school for 1 to 2 years longer, in middle school up to secondary, they actually earn 25% more in income. So the dream is to expand to other countries because extreme poverty and the lack of educating girls is still a significant problem in this world. And if you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, no poverty is the goal number 1. So I believe this is one of the greatest challenges, greatest problems that the world still faces today. We plan to expand. Right now, we're still in Nepal, and we're probably looking more into 5 years that we will then go into another country.
I understand you have a fundraising event on November 18. Tell us more about it.
I would love to. So currently we are in the process of committing to our 4th school. So our 4th school has been fully funded from our last event. And now this 5th event will, or this next event will then support and fund our 5th school. The theme is 007 Casino Royale. I really wanted to make it something exciting and fun for all of our donors and our attendees. And it's a James Bond theme. So the idea is, do you accept your mission? And the mission is to have this 5th school built by Building Education. This 5th school, we're really hoping to be able to support the far west region of Nepal, a really rural village that doesn't get the support that, most of the main bigger cities get. There's not a lot of government support out there. And then there's not a lot of other organizations that head out that way. It's on November 18th. It is from 7 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. We advise that everybody dress in James Bond theme. If you know me and the parties that we like to throw, it is usually relatively fun, formal. I always say dress your best, dress to impress, whatever makes you feel the best, like 100%, like, $1 billion, whatever makes you feel like $1 billion. That's how I want people to come. So yeah, it's at the Green Room at the San Francisco War Memorial. And I would love for anyone who can attend to come and learn more about building education and the work that we do.
How do people contact you if they need more information?
So they can find me on LinkedIn, Wendy Shew. Last name is spelled S-H-E-W. You can also look onto our website. It's www.bebuildingeducation.org. Or you can find me on Facebook, because I know a lot of people have Facebook and utilize that as well. So Wendy Shew, S-H-E-W.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was very informative information you provided. And I hope that you have a successful 007 Casino Royale fundraising event.
Thank you. I'm very excited too. Thank you so much for having me, Daphne. This means a lot to me. And, I love chatting with you and sharing more about my vision. And I'm so glad that we were able to connect and do this together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.